Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm finding out how many pawns I need to defeat the Magnus bot. I'll add 2 pawns each game. Let's get started. Okay, obviously that was never going to happen. The last time that I tried this, I basically had to fill the board with pawns, but since then I've learned a couple of new strategies. We'll start in the standard horde position, which is a chess variant that some of you may be familiar with, where white plays with a bunch of pawns and black plays with the regular setup. The only difference is for this challenge I have a king on the board, so I also have to be wary that I don't get checkmated. Let's go ahead and get started with a push in the center. The few things that I did learn new are 1, I have to keep track of weak and strong squares. For example, by pushing this pawn, I strengthen my control over the dark squares, but I weaken my control over the light squares adjacent. The second thing is do not, under any circumstances, let any of these pieces get behind the pawns. If these pieces get behind the pawns, right, pawns capture forward, they are defenseless from behind. So if they get back there, it's pretty much over. If the pieces do get back there for whatever reason, I have to be ready to just push all the way through the other side. Just trying to hold on to the position with just the king, holding on to all the pawns from behind, is basically never going to work. All right, let's go ahead and trade. Again, those are just a few concepts that I've picked up along the way. I don't really have another strategy besides that, so I'll take on d6. The queen comes out, right, and I think I'm good to push, right? I do weaken these squares, but both of them are protected, and I can follow up with e3 right after. So e4, we're met with a6. I think this trade is perfectly fine because I still have a wall of pawns behind it. So I'll take, the queen recaptures, fine. And I think my original strategy of following any pawn move with another pawn move right behind still should apply because it kind of goes hand in hand with that weak squares concept. All right, we get bishop to d7. I'm assuming the threat is to sacrifice potentially, but I don't see what the follow-up to that would be. I guess the fact that I wouldn't be able to push b3 because a3 would be weak, and that's that weak square concept that we talked about a moment ago. So what happens if I push b5? I hit the queen and I stop that idea, and I have plenty of pawns that can follow up right behind. So, actually, if I push b5, something like queen to a5 stops all of these pawns, right? b4 can never happen because a4 falls. So maybe a5 here is necessary. a5, and instead of letting my rook pawns fall behind, and then I can never move these pawns towards the center, I can move my rook pawn now, and then just continue to move more rook pawns. So I'll play a5 right now. Okay, we're met with e6. Challenges our control of the light squares a little bit. If takes, I think is totally fine. So I'll continue with my idea of pushing these pawns. I slightly weaken this square, but it's still protected by a chain of pawns, so I feel confident in that. Okay, rook to a7. Doesn't change the position at all, so a3. King to d8 seems like a random bot move who doesn't know what to do, so a2. And then queen to d6. I guess my pawns are thinnest right here in the center, so it might make more sense to play on the wings, especially considering what we talked about, right? If I move these pawns and say there's a trade that happens, I can never move any of these pawns. g3 can't move because it's trying to protect h4, but the rook hits it, which means that g2 can't move, which means that g1 can't move, which means that my whole kingside gets frozen as well. So I think I might start playing on the flanks here. Last time I played a lot in the center, and I paid for it dearly. So let's see, h5 weakens quote-unquote g5, but it's well protected, and h4 can follow right behind. So we'll play h5. Queen goes back to a6, seems like a non-issue. h4, h3, h2. Okay, and we do get our first trade? No, not our first trade, but we do get our first trade in a couple of moves. E takes f5. I should probably recapture towards the center. I can't imagine that taking with this pawn and then thinning out my position is better because it kind of welcomes a sacrifice at some point. So I'll take towards the center. Okay, queen to c6. My pawns are all well defended. I don't see an issue. And I think I can continue to advance on this flank. I can't play b5 anymore because a5 is loose. So I'll play g4. Weakens these 2 squares, but g3 follows right behind, and I don't see any sacrifices. Queen goes back to c8. Sure, why not? We'll continue with g3. Okay, we're getting a lot of space here, and all by himself, he's put basically all of his pieces, minus this rook, on the back rank, so I'm assuming that we're doing something right here. We'll play g2 next. King to c7. I mean, this is the most bot setup I've seen in my whole life. Nobody in their right mind would put all of the pieces on the back rank and then say, all right, Mr. King, time to go. Time to start the attack. But I'm assuming what he's preemptively handling is the fact that I'm moving all of these kingside pawns. So I guess it makes sense to put the king on the queen side, maybe knight c6, king back, something of that nature. All right, I think we've made just about the amount of progress that we can make here. And thinking it over a little bit more, I've actually realized that these two bishops are well placed to add support on the king side. So if I push, there's too many attackers if you include the bishop. So it might be time to look back over to the queen side. b5 I can't play because rook takes. And I'm quite happy that this pawn is doing a good job of holding on to the rook and basically not letting it escape. But what about c5? c5 allows c4, allows d5, allows d4. And I know I said I wasn't going to play in the center, but this is stuck. This is stuck. This is not stuck. This is basically the only place that I can create play. So I'll play c5. Knight to d7. I have to be careful now because there's ideas of sacrifices. So like d5, there's ideas of takes, takes, takes. And suddenly my position is a lot thinner than it was a moment ago. So I'll continue with c4. Weakens these two squares, quote unquote, but they're both defended. Doesn't give any pawns away. Let's see, c4, what if he sacks anyways? I'd take back with this pawn because I don't want to lose this a5 pawn. So c4, knight goes to b8. Now there's no more sacrificing idea, so I think now I can play d5. I still can't play b5, obviously this pawn drops, but d5, if knight comes back to d7 looking for that sack, I can play d4, and I think I'm hanging tight. Okay, queen to d8, doesn't cause any threats, I don't believe, so d4. Bishop goes to d7. Will pause and say I'm quite proud that I haven't given away any pawns. I think last time I unironically started with 1 or 2 pawns, and then I added 2 pawns each game, and I was fried by the time I got to the last game. I couldn't even see a mate in 4. Literally, there was a mate in 4, I didn't see it. We get bishop to d7. Again, b5 doesn't work. I need more support, so I'm going to play d3, c3, and kind of go back to that old strategy of basically plugging the holes that I've created. Bishop back. It's clear he doesn't know what to do here. King goes back. And since pawns move one at a time, I will just bring them all up. They're very slow, so I need to move them en masse, basically. Also, this variation is kind of weird. I'm not sure if it's the same in Horde, but a pawn that's on the back rank, which you may have noticed is not standard, can't move 2 squares. It can only move 1, and then once it moves into that starting position, then it has the option to move 1 or 2 squares, and then from then on out, it moves like a normal pawn. I know, it's very weird. We get queen to e8. I'm not super excited about the fact that my king is in the center because I'd like to advance e5, e4, but I don't want it to not be an option to capture with this pawn, right? I don't want this pawn to be pinned at some point. So I'll probably start here with king to d1. And actually, I've just noticed, I've been yapping about my king because I thought the idea was lining up the queen with the king, which might be one of the ideas, but another idea here is bishop takes. If I recapture, the queen takes on a4, and these squares are suddenly a lot weaker than they were a moment ago. But on the bright side, the queen kind of just sticks herself to the side, and maybe I can continue to advance in the center. So actually, change of plans. I'm leaving the king here for this turn at least, and I'm playing e5. Okay, we get rook to a6. He doesn't follow through on the sacrifice, and instead he brings out the rook, probably anticipating my eventual push. I'll play e4. Knight to e7. I think we're doing super good right now. Okay, knight to e7. I feel like b5 is in the cards at some point. It's on the table because rook takes, loses a pawn, yes, but it doesn't actually cause any problems in my position, right? I have this pawn chain, so he'd just be staring at another protected pawn. And that way I can even look at c6, d6. I just don't want to rush it unnecessarily. So knight to e7 is kind of interesting because it removes one of the defenders of f6, which seems to invite f6. It also stops the queen's vision on the e-pawn, so it seems to also invite e6. e6 is a little more tempting. Oh, not to mention it puts itself in a position to get hit by this d6 pawn. So what if I play d6 here? Knight to c6, d5. Probably sacrifice. I recapture, queen takes. Maybe not the best thing I've seen in the world. What about b5 first? Rook takes. d6 in that position, the knight goes back, d5, takes, and I think we're winning. So we'll play b5 for the purpose of controlling c6, to then follow it up with d6, d5, e6. All right, so we'll play b5. Rook takes, we'll play d6. Knight goes back, so far so good. And we might even be looking to just play d5 here. So d5, the idea is e6, takes. Actually, I'm not so happy with that. Let's play d5 anyways, because it's objectively a good move. We have to be aware that c5 is now weak, so we'll have to follow it up with d4 close behind, but d5 for now. Okay, rook goes back to a7. We'll play d4, plug in that extra space. King moves to d8. Let's play d3, king to d2. One, we get a pawn closer to the other pawns, and we move the king off this file, which I've ignored up until this point, but I can see it becoming a problem shortly. So we'll play king to d2. King moves back, and I think we're finally in a position. It's taken us 34 moves, but I think we're finally in a position to break through here. There's a couple of different ways to do it. c6 seems less tempting because there's a lot more pieces on that square, but e6, takes is kind of forced. So he'd have to give up the bishop for those two pawns, and the queen becomes a little more active. We've thinned out our pawn position, but we're still pretty solid. I don't see any breakthroughs, any weak squares, which was my issue last time. I wouldn't see weak squares. So we'll play e6. We get captures, we will take back, and we've reached that position where we have a wall of pawns. I'm not sure how we're supposed to continue to make progress here, but I will say we're doing pretty solid right now. I'd like to kind of thicken up the center a little bit. Maybe d5 is kind of interesting here. Tempo on the queen, and then I can follow it up with more pawn moves towards the center. But on the other hand, I have more pawns on the queen side, so it might make more sense to just kind of leave these here as a catch-all for any of these squares, and just push f5 instead. I'll push f5. Okay, the queen moves back to c8. So far, so good. How about f4 now? Could be an issue with b6, but I just continue with c6. So we'll play f4. Okay, king to d7. I know we're doing well when I continue to see these weird moves, because as soon as I see him start to like arrange his pieces in a funny position, I get suspicious, and it's probably just PTSD from the last time that I played this challenge, but I start to get suspicious. I think a sacrifice is coming, he's setting up a pin, and my, let's call it, spidey sense goes off. But when I see these kinds of moves, there's nothing happening there. That's an empty head. King to d7. The only issue with king to d7 is that it is setting up bishop takes, which is kind of crazy to put your king out in the center like that, but it does call for reinforcement. So we'll play e5. Queen moves over to d8. I don't think this is a threat at all. This is rock solid. So we might be in a position here to just play d5, e6. We'll give that a try, d5. Okay, king goes back. e6 isn't maybe the best now because it allows this once again, but we can reinforce with d4. Okay, king comes back, so we do have e6. Actually, we have c6 on the table as well. It's a matter of which one I think is best. I think e6 makes more sense because it's not met by another pawn, so we'll start with e6. Okay, we get king back. This is on the table again, but I'm really not too worried about it because we've made a lot of space with these other pawns. So let's say it were his turn again. Takes. There's no weak squares that he can penetrate, and I can continue to make progress somewhere else on the board. So in the meantime, I'll just keep pushing. f3. We get h6. Do I take or do I push? And I think the natural response is push, but it might be takes. So if I do capture, he would recapture, and I'm not sure that I can make progress. g5 takes, I drop h5, whereas with g6, and this is the reason I say it's the natural move, kind of tightens up his position. The only issue is knight to f6. So g5, knight takes, g4, knight takes, and the position crumbles. So what if I just don't do anything? What if I just leave the pawn here? Takes. I think that's perfectly fine, so I'll play f2. Okay, we do get that bishop sacrifice. We'll recapture. Queen takes on d6. And I'm not really sure what I'm looking for now. Maybe I should bring my king towards the center. I've been kind of avoiding doing this because it's what got me in problems last time, but I played king to e3, king to e4, protects this pawn, and then maybe I can push c5, d6, and kind of go for that storm. So I'll give that a try. King to e3. Okay, we're met with b6. Maybe now b4? No, that drops the a4 pawn. Uh-oh. I feel like I'm running out of moves a little bit. What if we do accept this capture? That way I can try to create some counterplay, because if I don't accept this and I leave the tension, right? I leave the tension, I have no idea where I'm supposed to break through here. Actually, I guess I could try b4. If we do drop a4 intentionally, c5, but that drops d5. So I need to play king to e4 first. Okay, king goes to e7. Now b4, rook takes, c5, takes. Looks promising, so I'll give it a try. Whoa, that's interesting. Instead of taking the pawn, we get knight to d7, which is something I would have never calculated in a billion years on this earth, because it looks like it's just a free knight. Let's see, takes, c5. I get the pawn push that I wanted. Rook takes, weakens b5. I push again. I mean, I will take a knight. A knight is a knight is a knight. So c5. Okay, we do weaken up. Oh, that was one of the principles. Never let one of the pieces into the position. And that's why knight to d7 works. Because if we take, we open up this file, and all that's left is for me to move my king. I'm sure he'll double up. Everybody's coming for the party. All right, our third rule was if one of these pieces does make it behind, we have to push. So we're not in time anymore, but the threat is queen to e2 is checkmate. But I will try to follow my rules up until the bitter end. All right, try to run. All right, try to push. We'll play, if we play a5, takes from behind, and that's the issue. He can just capture anything he wants once the pieces infiltrate the position. So we'll play I don't even know what we'll play. c7, why not? All right, queen c4 is mate. Let's add 2 more pawns. All right, we're back with 2 extra pawns. And this was the issue I faced last time as well, is that it felt unclear as to where I should actually push into the position. But for right now, I'm going to try to play on the flanks and let him make a deciding move. I'll play h5. We're met with a6 right away. We're challenged. Let's see. a5 takes. b5 is weak. a5 is solid. So I can continue with c4 after. So I'll play a5 right now. Takes. f6. Okay, he's threatening the dark squares, but the dark squares are well defended. I need to stop making a habit of seeing a pawn trade and immediately thinking, okay, takes, what do I do? Instead, I can think about it in terms of light and dark squares. These dark squares are extremely well protected. I can actually fortify them with h4. So I should be fine. Pawn takes, because it's not just me who has to make moves forward, it's also him. He has to figure out how he's going to push into my position. I'll take towards the center with my f-pawn. We get rook to a7, and I'll go ahead and protect this pawn before he gets in trouble. So c4, we're met with e6, threatening the light squares, but the light squares are well protected. We'll play f4. Rook back, we'll play f3. He captures, and we will capture towards the center again. h6, again, threatens a dark square, but the dark squares are well protected. What's not well protected is h5. So if takes, we drop h5, so I have to play g4 here to protect it. And this is actually pretty handy dandy, thinking about it in terms of weak and strong squares. Okay, b6 threatens a5, a dark squared pawn, and I don't think I can reinforce this. I can play a6 though, and then takes, the dark squares are solid, so let's play that, a6. Takes, we'll capture towards the center. Okay, we do get that sacrifice, which he was going to have to do at some point or another. The rook recaptures, and now what? What if we play b4 here? Fortifies this square, which I really wouldn't want to be sacrificed on, so we'll play b4. Bishop to b7, hits a light square. These light squares are tough as nails, so I'll continue to push my pawns. Queen to b8, continue to push. Rook to a7, and we've reached basically as far as we can get on the queen side. b3 doesn't do us any good because it drops a3, but we can now look to make a little bit of progress on the king side instead. Play g3. We do get that capture. I'll capture towards the center. Okay, king moves to f7. And I think I can just double move my pawn now to h4. Sweet. Queen to d8. And as you've noticed, when they're on that back rank, they have to move 1 square, and then they have the option to move 2. All right, king to e8, and I'll go ahead and fill up these gaps. Cool. King to e7, again, very strange bot move, but doesn't look like it threatens anything. So it's now up to us to figure out how we make progress in this position. f6 is very tempting because it's check. d6 is equally tempting for the same reason. And I think d6 makes a little more sense because I don't want my pawns to get stuck on the king side quite yet. I want them to be fluid and ready to do something, which they are at the moment. Whereas on the queen side, I've already got this pawn chain going, so the natural progression is d6, e7. And I can't really destabilize this, right? b3 drops this. If I play this pawn forward, it would drop b4 at some point. So this is pretty set in stone. I'll follow through with d6 for that reason. King to e8, right? This is very nicely set in stone now, and it allows me to push d5. Okay, bishop comes to b7. I can continue with d4. I'd like to really fortify these pawns as they are on the way back, minus a3, which is harder to sacrifice on. We'll play d4. We get queen to c8, and I think we're finally looking at e6 here. Reason being, oh no, we can't play that because takes drops this pawn. Okay, so we can't play e6 quite yet, but we'll go ahead and push these pawns that are kind of falling behind. Rook to a6, I assume, is looking for takes, and then sacrificing the bishop. So let's see. Takes, sacks the bishop, recapture, rook comes into play, which I'd really rather not have to deal with. So instead, I'll take on c7 myself. The queen takes back. Now I can play d6 again, because there's always another pawn where that came from. Hits the queen, obviously, but the main priority is that now there's no pawn hitting the d6 square. So both of these pawns are enough to defend against these two pieces. We'll play d6. We get queen back to b8. And I'm kind of suffering here a little bit because I really want to play e6, but d6 falls and I don't want d6 to fall. So instead I can continue with d5, d4, maybe bring this d pawn up a little bit as well. Rook to a4 puts a little bit of pressure on this dark square. I think I can just continue with d4. Oh, and then, oh, wait a minute. This is one of those principles that we talked about, is keeping track of which squares are strong and weak. If I play d4, I weaken c4. Which would explain why he moved his rook, because now the bishop can pop in there, hit the pawn, and I can't defend it. If I play b3, this drops. So instead, I'll push this pawn first. Okay, bishop goes back. Now we can push d4. Now we can push d3. Okay, bishop to b7. All right, I think we've made just about as much progress as we're going to on the queen side. So turning our attention to the king side, we can do something like f6 potentially. Takes. And we start clearing the way for some more pawns to start moving forward. We'll play f6. The bishop goes back to c8. And we can continue to play f5 now. Pawn takes, we'll recapture. And we're recapturing with this pawn because if I take with this pawn, we still have this issue. So we'll capture towards the center. Queen b7. I really like that we've made this structure. It even includes his own pawn in a sense because it's kind of like a wall that these pieces can't cross anymore. Unless, of course, he did like one of these maneuvers, but even then, the king would have to move out of the way. Long story short, we've really cramped his pieces quite effectively, I'd say. We'll play f4 here, continue to push. Queen goes back, we'll play f3. Okay, king to f7 allows e6 with check. If takes, bishop sacrifice, we recapture. Takes, e5 defends these two pawns. But we kind of get stuck there, and I'm happier with his pieces stuck over here than opening up this position. So what about g5? Obviously drops h5, but then I can play g6, and this rook by itself is not a threat to me. I mean, if I allow all of his pieces to cross through, that's an issue. This rook by itself is less of a threat, so I'll play g5. Knight to f6. Okay, this is desperation. Obviously, I personify the bot when I say desperation. This is not desperation, this is zugzwang, basically. A more human move was probably like bishop g7, but for whatever reason, the bot elected to play knight to f6. If I take with this pawn still drops, so I'll take towards the center. Okay, rook takes h5. And now, I'll probably have to give up this pawn as well. So g4 takes, g5, and this pawn structure seems to hold on just fine, the idea being g6, and eventually pushing all the way through. Maybe even just g4, g5 to hold on to this pawn, and then e6. So I'll play g4. Rook takes. We'll play g5. Rook comes back. And I think now we could even bring the king over. What is this? I meant bring the king over and then play like g4. But then I really don't want the king being the only one defending this pawn, so maybe scratch that. We'll leave this g-pawn where it is on g2. The original idea was e6, so let's take a look at that. e6 is check. Takes. Whoops. Takes, takes. King could move forward, which stops the idea of 5, so maybe after e6, I take back with the d-pawn instead. And the only issue with e6 is takes, takes, takes. Actually, I already calculated this. The issue was that it frees up his pieces, and I don't want to free up his pieces. Okay, that's why I was looking at this originally, that's right. What about g6? g6 is unobstructed. King goes back, and maybe there's a way for me to push through for a queen, considering this queen can't actually see the back rank. So I'll play check. King goes back to g8, and I think I'm really close here to basically forcing a queen. Maybe e6 now? Takes, whoops, takes, takes. Sorry, I'm getting used to a new mouse. Takes, takes. There's no more sack on e6. But now he can sack on d6, because if this pawn moves, it weakens the d6 square. So takes, takes, takes. What then? e7? Rook back, f7 is check, king moves, queen. And I think I can force a queen there, so e6. We'll take back. Obviously the trade. Queen takes back. Does e7 actually get away? Oh, I just realized I calculated it without the bishop here. I said e7, rook to a8, like that was gonna stop it. What I haven't done in a minute is push any other pawns. So what about d5, fortifying e6 so that he can't sacrifice? Let's give that a try. We'll play d5. Okay, the queen moves back to f8. And now e5 I don't like because of takes. f7 I kind of do like. Takes, takes, super rock solid. Check if the king moves forward. You know what? Maybe I do need to bring my king over so I can play g4. The only issue is if I play f7 first, I allow this. If I don't play f7, then I just need to protect this pawn, which means I need to play e5, which means the rook would capture, which means g4, which means takes, takes, takes. So I guess I have to play f7. Okay, king to g7. It's not ideal because I really did have in mind g4, but I'm sure we can find a workaround. We've kind of lost this pawn structure that we had. So what about c5, right? Because even all the way back at a1, our base root comes from controlling these dark squares. So what if I play c5, d6, e7? Or even better, c5, d6, e5. Oh no, that drops f5. I think it's a good idea though, c5, and then we can even start pushing other pawns from behind. Okay, the rook goes back. Let's continue to push d4. So far, controlling these dark squares has worked out pretty well in our favor. Queen to d8 is what we're met with. e5 doesn't work because queen takes, so what about c4? Let's give that a try. Oh wait, c4 doesn't work for the same reason we talked about at the beginning of the game. c4 walks into bishop to a6. Oh, but now I have b5. Because he can't sacrifice here. Or can he? Takes, takes, queen check. Drops the king, drops the pawn. Okay, not the best either. I'm going to bring my king to f2 and set it aside. Oh, king to f2, queen here? Was that the idea of queen to d8, looking for queen to h4 check? Okay, what about king to f1? If queen here, the only real threat is that the queen could come back here, give check, but then I just move back up. Oh, and then the queen, ooh, that is a real threat. Obviously can't play g3 because rook takes. So I'm going to move my king over to d2. Okay, we get bishop to a6. I think I can continue now with d6. So we'll play that. Queen does come into h4, and this is kind of that third principle we were talking about. If the pieces do get behind, you have to be ready to push. So, how on earth do I push here? All right, because the threat is queen to f2, takes, and then mate. Although I guess if queen to f2, I could also play c4. I'd have to set it up with b3, which weakens a3, but I think it's necessary, so we'll play b3. Okay, bishop to b5. We do have c4 on the table because he's played this to allow the rook to come through, but now we can play c4 with tempo, it seems. So we'll play that. Ooh, bishop back to d7, takes. Ugh, it's rough because I want this structure to stay, but this is extremely tempting. Right, takes, takes. Obviously the idea is to sack here later, so e5. Takes, 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 e6, king here. I might just play d5. Okay, rook takes, which is expected, and maybe now I can take. Rook here, c6, queen back. Weakens this, but e5, so I'll take. Okay, the queen does come back. We'll play c6. Rook also goes back. Now I think I can play e5. f6, or maybe e5, e6. There's also c5 on the table. Okay, we get queen to b8, hits b4, so c3 forced. Okay, rook to a7. Oh, I'm so close here. I know I'm so close. I don't see how I'm going to break through necessarily. c7 walks into another rook sacrifice, which seems crazy, but it does just pick up all these pawns. f6 walks into takes. e6 walks into queen takes. So what about c5? Okay, queen to a8, looking for that sacrifice on a2. And now we'll push. Rook sacrifice. Takes or takes? If I take with this pawn, queen lasers in, so I assume I have to take with this pawn. Queen to d8. I'm not super happy because you can see that my pawns are thinning out, right? I have like 2 straight pawn towers, but they are super far forward and they are well defended, quite deep into the position. So it's funny, it's kind of like a little snake that traipses through the position. Same thing on this side, which I think is quite funny. We'll continue to push these pawns together. Rook to f8, e4 now. Rook back, e5. Okay, rook f8, e4. Queen comes in, looking for check. So king here. Okay, queen comes in, king f1. Ooh, why not queen h2? In fact, why not queen takes f4? But queen comes to h4, c7. I'm assuming the queen came to h4 because of c7. The idea is to stop this with a rook sacrifice, but I'll play it anyways. Rook to a8, c7, or rather c8. Takes, takes. Did we do it? Oh my god, we did it. We did. I celebrate because if I trade the queens, which is a no-brainer, one rook can't even stop 3 pawns if they're far enough advanced. You're not going to stop, what is this, 4.5 bajillion pawns. You're never going to stop them. Okay, rook takes. How do I follow the e6? Anything is winning here, basically. Okay, rook to a8, e7. I just have to not stalemate him, basically. Okay, give me another queen. We did it. And mate. All right, we did it. I honestly don't know how many pawns that was. I will put it up on screen in post. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I will admit, I don't think I'm going to play Horde again for at least maybe 3 billion years, because that was, oh my god, that was a pain. But we did finish the challenge after all. Anyways, I will see you guys in the next one.